Old habits are hard to break, and I think the hardest habit to break apparently is the habit of blaming the Jews. I'll have details on how it all works out with the Palestinian war against Israel coming up on In Focus. For the past 30 years, Israel's elite, our left, our media, our general staff of the army, the entire establishment has been organized around the principle of a two-state solution. And they, of course, are not alone. In the United States, the elite, the foreign policy establishment, the media in particular, academia, they've been organized around the principle of a two-state solution for 50 years. And the American Jews came along with the Israeli left 30 years ago. So for 30 years, you've had the elite power structures in Israel and in the United States organized around the principle that the way to solve everything in the Middle East is through the establishment of a Palestinian state in Israel's heartland, in Judea and Samaria, in Jerusalem, and of course in the Gaza Strip. For the Americans, and by the way, for the Europeans, it was a way of making life easy when they had to deal with the Arab world. So all they had to do was say, well, what we really need is a two-state solution, and at base, the two-state solution is about one thing for Westerners. It's about blaming Israel for everything. Because what we've found over the past 50 years of two-state solutionizing on the part of Western policy elites is that it was sort of shorthand for blaming the Jews, or a euphemism for blaming the Jews. If Israel is controlling Judea and Samaria and Gaza in the past, and Jerusalem, of course, its capital city, and what's lacking is a Palestinian state that is supposed to be formed in those areas. And obviously, the side that's supposed to do something is Israel. It's supposed to give up the territories that it controls, give them to the Palestinians. And what has sort of become the idea fix, the one central concept that animates all Western policymaking in relation to the Middle East since the 1970s has been that the source of all the pathologies in the Arab world, whether it's the oil embargo from 1973 of the OPEC countries or the proliferation of international terrorism on the part of state sponsors of terrorism in the Arab world and Iran, whatever it happens to be, chemical weapons proliferation, nuclear proliferation, the problem that's at the source of everything, the one thing that's provoking all of this bad action on the part of the Arabs, on the part of the Iranians, is the presence of Jews in Judea and Samaria, Israel's sovereignty over Jerusalem, and until 2005, Israel's control over the Gaza Strip. So, if you would just get the Jews to leave these areas, then there would be peace. There would be peace all over the Middle East, and that's it. That's the solution to everything. This is what I just remember, like in 2006, when the United States had gotten enmeshed in this guerrilla war in Iraq, and they didn't quite know how to proceed, and there was question whether then President George Bush was going to order the surge of U.S. forces to actually fight the insurgency, or whether they were going to leave. He established, President George W. Bush established this Blue Ribbon Commission of Lee Hamilton and James Baker, the BakerHamilton Commission, and they were supposed to come up with a policy that was going to solve the American problem in Iraq. How was America going to leave Iraq in victory, etc.? So what was their prescription? Their prescription was that in order to leave Iraq in victory or with dignity or whatever, not lose the war in Iraq, the United States had to coerce Israel to cough up Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. They had already coughed up. We had Gaza in 2005, and also leave the Golan Heights, give it to Assad in Syria, and then the Arabs would put down their weapons. Everything would be fine. The United States could leave Iraq in peace. So in other words, BakerHamilton, they established this commission. They put it together, they sat, they thought, they deliberated, and they thought that the problem with Iraq was the Jews. So it was very easy. You never had to think about any problem in and of itself. You always just figured out a way, even if it was imaginary, and it was always imaginary, to link whatever the problem was that you were dealing with to Israel, blame the Jews, and then go home and say, here, I fixed it. And so that's what we've seen all along. That was the Western way. That has been the Western way really since 1973, but certainly in a major and declared way since the beginning of the so-called peace process between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, in Oslo in 1993. Since then, that has been the principle. For the Israelis, the situation is a little bit different. It's not that they're blaming the Jews per se, they're blaming certain Jews. So from an Israeli perspective, for our left, for our elite, left elite, same thing, the idea of the two-state solution came to solve a political problem. So it's not that Israel is to blame, it's that the Israeli right is to blame, because the Israeli right is really the main faction in Israeli society that doesn't want to cough up land for peace. They're the only ones who insist that there can be no concessions of Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem. They're the ones who insist on living in Judea and Samaria, and until they were expelled in 2005 in Gaza. And so it was a way of winning political battles. All you have to do is blame the right. Everything, all the problems that we have diplomatically with the United States, any tension in the U.S.-Israel relation is entirely the fault of the bad Jews of Israel, the Israeli right. And really what we need to do is kick them out of power any way possible, and force a two-state solution down their throats by hook or by crook, because then, we'll destroy them as a political force, and the Americans will love us, the Europeans will love us, and everything will be fantastic. And so for Israel, there was this idea. For the West, there was that idea, but they all came together. And for American Jews, of course, it was easy. So they fought the establishment more or less for 20 years, although many of the Jews who were in the establishment pushed the idea of a two-state solution well before 1993, led really by Thomas Friedman and some other radical left anti-Zionists who had been campaigning against Israel since the inception of the concept in the early 1970s. But the bulk of the American Jewish establishment came along in 1993 when they went with the Israeli left. And so from AIPAC and the ADL, the federations, all of the major Jewish organizations, except for a few right-wing holdouts, everybody went ahead with the Oslo idea, with the peace process idea, and support for a two-state solution became the animating narrative as well of the American Jewish establishment, and has stayed there as the animating narrative of the American Jewish establishment for 30 years. So this never made sense, right? It was proven wrong every single day since the onset of the so-called peace process. Israel hasn't known one day without Palestinian terrorism, and there have been peaks in those terrorist attacks. Of course, the obvious one, the precursor of October 7th, was the Palestinian terror war that went on from September of 2000 until it sort of petered out in 2004. And that saw over 1,000 Israelis murdered by Palestinians in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, and even Israeli Arabs, Jerusalem Arabs, in a series of suicide bombings, roadside shootings, massacres inside of private homes, of families, and whatever, anything that you can conceive of. That's what they were blowing up, and they were using themselves as human bombs to blow up Israel, Israelis, Jews, in the name of jihad, in the name of Islam, and of course in the name of resistance to Israeli settlers. So that didn't work then, but nobody cared. Like the complete and utter commitment of our elites and our establishments in Israel and the United States, and obviously Europe was always there, to this idea of blaming the Jews, or in the case of the Israeli left, blaming the right-wing Jews, was so convenient to everybody that no amount of truth could possibly get in the way. I remember, I've experienced it on my back, that in the United States, the most Jewish federations, if they have panel discussions on issues related to Israel and the Palestinians, then right-wing Jews not allowed to participate, particularly not if they're Israeli. They have these discussions where you have the whole spectrum of permissible opinions represented, from the anti-Zionist left to the TwoState Solution, pro-Israel left, and that's all. Those are the only permitted positions. Everybody else is left out of the room. And in Israel, if you don't believe in the two-state solution, you're not going to be promoted to the general staff. You're not going to be given the job of a news editor in any of the major media networks, television, radio, or any of the daily papers in Israel. You have to have this view if you want to be on the top of the media. Academia, forget about it. They don't even have token right-wingers anymore in the social sciences or humanities and the faculties of Israeli universities. That's just totally not allowed. And that's well and good. They keep their guild. In the United States, of course, you're not going to hear these kinds of opinions voiced in the State Department, maybe in the National Security Council among political appointees in Republican administrations. We had that with Trump. We had Ambassador David Friedman. And of course, because of that, they actually got to peace and they nearly ended the Arab-Israeli conflict with the Abraham Accords. But that's another story for another day. This is the guiding paradigm. The Israeli military hated the Trump administration because they were against this paradigm. And obviously the Washington establishment vomited Trump and his people out of Washington as quickly as they could. So this whole thing, it already crashed down so many different times that who cares, right? I mean, you got to go with it because it protects you and your guild and the members of your group. And so you got to keep going. And they're never going to stop, and they're never going to stop. And then we had October 7th. And everything that extremists, right-wing, zealots, whatever, settlers like myself and the majority of Israeli Jews had been warning would happen for, years, had been saying, had been explaining, had been showing the Palestinians were planning for years and disregarded for saying it and ostracized for saying it. Everything happened. Now, it wasn't one thing or another thing, all of it. All of it happened in one day, and it wasn't just Hamas. It was Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It was Fatah, right? Fatah terrorists in Gaza also participated. We've shown you the footage that they filmed of themselves participating in the mass murder, the rape, the looting, etc. They all participated, thousands and thousands of civilians from Gaza. And then we've shown you, right, the opinion polls of Palestinians since then that show that 85% of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, and another 65% of Gazans, they supported the slaughter of October 7th, the genocide of October 7th. They're all for it. They love Hamas, and they don't like the PLO. They don't like Fatah. They don't like the Palestinian Authority because they talk to Jews. It's not acceptable. This is not where Palestinian society is. We've shown you how the leaders of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, Mohammed Ashtaya, all of the security people who all are trained by the United States, armed by the United States, financed by the United States, all of them support Hamas. None of them will condemn October 7th. Nobody, because they support. And you had Mohammed Ashtaya, who's considered a pragmatic and a technocrat, who was appointed at the insistence of the United States as a fig leaf under Mahmoud Abbas to prove that they're professionals now and they're technocrats and they're pragmatists. So he came out and said that they want a unity government with Hamas, and they keep saying that's their goal, right? So the Israeli people, writ large, totally got it, right? I mean, if it had been sort of an even split, including the Arabs, in support of a Palestinian state, the two-state solution, and then 50% of Israelis opposing it, that totally changed. So a direct polls analysis of Israeli public opinion since October 7th showed an incredible thing. It showed that there's been a 44-point shift to the right among Israelis. 30% of voters who voted for the parties in the sort of the left-wing minority bloc in the Knesset say that they've moved to the right. 58% of people who are already on the right move further to the right, but 30% of leftists moved to the right. And I think the most important data point in the poll that was published for the first time last week is that 81% of Israelis overall, including Jews, Arabs, Druze, everybody, says that there's no chance of peace with the Palestinians. Zero, none. And what's even more amazing is that 70% of people who voted for the parties on the left say that there's no chance of peace with the Palestinians. Okay, none. 10% said that there is still a chance for peace with the Palestinians, and then the other 9% said they don't know. So 81% of Israelis now say absolutely no chance of peace with the Palestinians. 70% of people on the left said that there's zero chance of peace with the Palestinians, and the rest of, and the 10% of Israelis who think that there is a peace prospect, I mean, I think we can all say that they basically are all, on this very top level of the establishment in Israel, and they're starting to sweat. And it's coming out all over the place here in Israel. So I think earlier this week, or was it the end of last week, one or the other, the Kol HaYehudi news service that I'm always citing because they're like the only ones bringing information. So they showed that beginning on October 8th, you had a group of retired IDF generals together with other, leftist political activists get together under the roof of these two left-wing NGOs, Mitvim and the Burl Katz-Nelson Foundation, funded both by the New Israel Fund. And they came together and started putting plans. They started weekly meetings to put together plans for the day after the war. And amazingly, the purpose of their day after plans was to use the war as a means to establish a Palestinian state. Now, they're looking really alarmed at the data, which apparently is very similar to the data that was surveyed by direct polls, and see that the public totally opposes Palestinian statehood, and this is all that they want. This is what they want. This is like their thing, right? So they're saying, okay, so what we're going to have to do in order to shove this down the throat of the Israeli people is we're going to have to use international pressure. We're going to have to use the United States to coerce the Israeli government. Either Netanyahu has to be ousted by the United States government, or just U.S. pressure, condition U.S. aid for the war effort on accepting that the end of the war is going to be this renewed peace process that, again, 81% of Israelis don't believe has any chance of success. 70% of Israeli leftists reject the prospects of peace with the Palestinians in the future. And so they're saying, okay, we need international pressure led by the United States, led by the Biden administration, against the government of Israel, against the people of Israel, to force this down our throat. There's like a condition for U.S. aid. And we're really seeing this is the policy of the Biden administration, where they keep saying, you need to talk to us about the day after. You need to talk to us about the day after. We insist that we have a revitalized Palestinian Authority, whatever that means. That means, relabeled, repackaged, everything. Same terrorists, same everything, same total dedication to the annihilation of the state of Israel. The Biden administration policy is that we have to use the one-day Holocaust and the war that follows in Gaza, right, as a means to coerce Israel back, to corral us back into the two-state solution paradigm. We will not give it up. We will not allow a Holocaust to give it up. No, we're not going to do it. We're going to force it on Israel. We're going to force it down Israel's throat, and this is what these left-wing generals are saying, you got to do it. And then the IDF Central Command, led by Yehuda Fuchs, is also, pushing this narrative. So it was really amazing. It came out yesterday. I mean, I spoke about this a month ago, but Ariel Kahana, the very straight-laced and very establishmentarian diplomatic writer for Israel Hayom, he writes this piece in the paper yesterday where he shows that the IDF has been exposed as lying about data of settler violence. Oh, that's the other thing. In this plan that's been put out by the New Israel Fund-funded NGOs, the working group led by former planning division director of the IDF leader Nimrod Shefer, who's a very far left activist, and Gior Island, a former National Security Council leader and IDF general. They're sort of the chairman of this plan to force the Palestinian narrative down the throat of the Israeli people after the war through U.S. pressure. So they said in their plan that the way to do it is to demonize the settlers and to talk about settler violence. So, like, this isn't really working because, you know, the settlers in Judea and Samaria make up like 6% of the population of Israel and 30% of the killed in action in the war in Gaza, right? So everybody's sort of reassessing their relationship with demonizing the Israeli right, and particularly the religious right, because these are the heroes of the war. These are the people who are on the front line saving the country, and everybody realizes that this is a war for Israel's existence, and the people who are fighting it are the much maligned, demonized settlers, the messianics. They want a dichotomy between Zionists, who are the leftists, and messianic nut jobs, who are on the right. So those messianic nut jobs are the ones who are sacrificing their lives for the country, and everybody sees it, and it's kind of like falling apart in their hands. And so at the same time that, you know, you have 90% of the men in the communities in Judea and Samaria are in the army now, the same 10% of Israelis who believe in peace or peace process with a Palestinian society that's organized around the one principle of annihilating the Jews and acted upon it on October 7th in such a profound way, they're saying what we have to do is demonize these people. So, you know, it's like a split screen. You're showing this caricature of some sort of demonic, satanic, cult. And on the other side, you see reality, which is these are the best people that Israel has, and they're giving their lives in terrible numbers for the country, and for the country, not for something little, you know, or sectoral. No, like for everybody. So that's not really working. So the Central Command, though, took this up in the Army. Yehuda Fuchs, the head of the Central Command, and he starts regurgitating data points of the UN, which I talked about in the last show, how they're comprised of totally fallacious data to say that there's been an increase in settler violence since October 7th, when there was a 50% decrease over 2022 in October to November, and in November to December again, 50% down. So it's like nothing, and like the numbers don't even compare to violence in Tel Aviv. So like they're like minuscule. But so he puts out these numbers, he's parroting this anti-settler propaganda that's being put out by Western elites, right? Because he's part of that group, and it's totally false. And the police that's actually in charge of collecting the data saying, wait a minute, so Uzi Levy, who's the head of the Samaria and Judea region of the Israel police, it's like he's responsible for all this, and he's saying none of this data is true. It totally is not reflective of reality. There hasn't been a 200% increase in settler violence. There's been a 50% reduction in fighting between Jews and Arabs, and it's totally wrong. This is a total lie. So then Fuchs, the general from the IDF, gets mad at Levy, the police superintendent, and demanding that he change his data to alignment with the UN says, and Levy won't. So this all just came out, the fight between Fuchs and Levy in this Israel Hayom article yesterday. And then the IDF sees that they're under incredible attack by politicians who now know the actual data, and by the public who know the truth about settlers, and they're like walking it back. So they go, oh, wait a minute. So we're the 10% of Israelis who are alone in maintaining our faith with this antiquated paradigm. And then, like when Akola Yehudi published all of the minutes of these meetings, which these people put up on their website because they didn't think there was any problem with them coming out openly and saying, we're going to start demonizing the settlers now so that we can give a state to the people who just massacred 1,200 Israelis and took 240 Israelis hostage. We want them to be in charge of Gaza and Judea and Samaria, and the settlers are the ones who are standing in their way. And it works out, well, no, actually 81% of Israelis are standing in their way, 70% of people in your own political camp in the left. So that's a problem for them. And so it was sort of an interesting article because at the end, Ariel Kahane writes, well, Central Command or the Army seems to realize that there's a problem with their data. And so now their new statement is, well, working closely with the settler leaders and IDF officers, we've been able to calm things down and diminish the violence of the settlers. So there's sort of a grudging acknowledgement that everything that they were saying was total lie, right? Oh, we didn't mean it. No, we actually are responsible for reducing it. Yeah, no, it's fine. So this is what the new thing is because they're realizing that the gravitational force of their own society is moving against them, and more importantly, their own social camp, political camp on the left are like, no, you can't do this anymore. And so that's sort of a new phenomenon. And I would argue that as the IDF wakes up to this, and more importantly, as central voices on the left are saying, wait a minute, we're not going to have a Palestinian state. No, we're not going to do that. And no, we're not going to leave Gaza because we can't, and we're not going to trust the UN. I mean, they're like, there's no difference between really when you have this kind of consensus in Israel against a Palestinian state, it's not Caroline Glick, saying it. It's everybody saying it. Right? And so we're back to kind of a pre-Oslo political view in Israel where the consensus in Israel is saying, hello, reality knocked on our door and then bashed into our homes and burned us alive, right? And we can't ignore it anymore, so we're not going to. Right? It's not that's what happened in Israel on October 7th. And that's why you're seeing, I had my guests on the Caroline Glick Show this week are two women who are members of this new group called Mothers of Warriors, and they, like many other new organizations, Forum, the Heroism Forum. So these are the mothers and sisters of men who are fighting in Gaza and women who are fighting in Gaza, and they're demanding that the government stop enabling the resupply of Hamas under the title, the headline, humanitarian aid. And they're not the only ones. There's the Heroism Forum, who are the parents of fallen Israeli soldiers who have been killed in this war, who are demanding that the government not back down and fight to victory and not allow a ceasefire or a withdrawal or a lowering of the intensity of the fighting until we've actually defeated Hamas. And so you have all of these organizations, civil society organizations, I don't even know if you can call them organizations. They're people who are really mad at the thought that these terrorists, these Nazis, may continue to, control any part of Gaza at all, or that they will be unified with their terrorist brethren in the Palestinian Authority under some sort of concept of a fake peace treaty that's going to place all of Israel under existential threat. And so those are the people who are saying it. All of us are saying it. So I think it would be a really good idea, given the shift, the massive shift that's not likely to shift back anytime soon in Israel, for the American Jewish establishment to do the same thing. Because really, if you want to know why they've been caught flat-footed, in this tsunami of Jew hatred in the United States, it's because of the panels. It's because for 30 years, they have insisted that any discussion inside of the Jewish community of the United States that does not blame Israel, and specifically the Israeli right, for the pathologies, for the pathological hatred of the Palestinians towards Jews, not only in Israel, but as they're saying now, on college campuses and throughout the streets of New York and Washington and Chicago and LA, towards them as well because they're Jewish, it makes it impossible for them as a practical matter to defend themselves. If the people responsible for the absence of their vaunted two-state solution are their own brothers and sisters in Israel, but on the Israeli right, then how are they supposed to defend themselves against attack? Then the Palestinians are right, aren't they? Then the people who are telling them that they don't have the right to breathe in and out in the United States or anywhere else for that matter under a globalized intifada, they have a case. because Israel's bad, because it's Israel's fault, that there's no peace, because Israel's repressing these Palestinians. Well, we've seen what a lie that is. Israel's not repressing anybody. We haven't been in Gaza since 2005, and yet here they came out and they, look at what they did. I mean, look at what they did. And look at what happened in America after they did it. You know? They had a lot of friends in America who hate Jews just as much as the people of Gaza do. And look at how the Arabs who are supposedly, who have been living under self-rule in Judea and Samaria since 1996, responded to this. Israel isn't occupying Ramallah. Ramallah's been under full Palestinian control since 1996. Same with Bethlehem, same with Jenin, same with Tukar, same with all of these cities. So, what are you talking about? What occupation? There hasn't been an occupation since 1996, and in Gaza there hasn't been any Israeli presence at all since 2005. Yet, the American Jewish establishment has latched onto this idea that there's a problem with part of Israeli society, and they're really to blame for everything, right? And American Jews who support them are just yuck. Like, blech, you don't want to have them at your dinner parties, right? And then in the end, what are you going to do? You're left with no ability to defend yourself because you've completely distorted reality in order to suit your social requirements. But now reality is attacking your kids at Harvard. What are you going to do? Maybe you should do what Israelis are doing, which is stop ignoring reality. The reality is that the two-state solution ignores, the drooling, vomiting, soiling the floor, big blob of hatred towards Jews, right? That's what it's been doing, this pus coming out of open sores, hatred of Jews that's just sitting right there, this blob in the middle of everybody's living room. And it's called the Palestinians, and it's called the two-state solution, and it's called blame the Jews. They've ignored this. In Israel, we've ignored it. Our establishment ignored it. Our military elite ignored it because it just doesn't fit with a narrative that advances their careers, their political interests, their contracts with European NGOs, whatever it is. Doesn't advance them. It's not good for them. It's better for them from every perspective, from a personal perspective, to just blame the Israeli right. Same for the American Jews, and of course for the international community. Just blame Israel because, what's the difference, really? And as a result, you lost Iraq, lost Afghanistan, lost Syria. Russia's back in the Middle East, stronger than ever. China's in the Middle East, stronger than ever. Saudis don't trust America. UAE doesn't trust America because everything for the Americans is Palestinian statehood. Everything for Americans is let's get to a resolution of this conflict between a people organized around the principle of genocide and people who just want to be left alone to tend their fig tree and their grapevines. We're not interested in the Palestinians. Look, we left Gaza. Go build your houses. Go do your thing. Here, take our greenhouses. Use them to develop agriculture, and they burned them down, and they built terrorist tunnels, right? The 500 kilometers of terrorist tunnels they built underneath with all of the humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian assistance now is controlled by UNRWA, which is controlled by Hamas. It all goes to Hamas. The United States is arming genocidal, anti-Semitic lunatics in Judea and Samaria with the Palestinian security forces. All they want to do is annihilate Israel with American bombs, with American weapons, with American doctrine, with American uniforms, American tax dollars, with American political support. That's what you have with the Palestinian army that the United States is fielding in Judea and Samaria. That's what you have with the UN, US, EU-funded Hamas regime in Gaza. That's what you have. And you have now, 1,200 dead Jews on October 7th, and another, 200 dead Jews in Gaza since then, our soldiers, hostages, etc. And, we don't know how many more it's going to happen, but Israelis understand what this is about. It's about our survival. It's not about a two-state solution. It's not about getting TS like some sort of Harvard seminar in conflict resolution. This is an existential war because what the Palestinians said, it's going to be us, it's not going to be you, we're going to kill all of you. Us or them, zero sum. You decide. We've decided that the Palestinians say, we're going to take over all your land, we're going to rape all your women, kill all your babies, behead all your men. We're going to do this. We're going to have fun with it. It's going to be great. We're sadists. We love it. Deal with it. And the Jews are saying, hell no, but we're fighting to win because we don't have any choice. This is an existential struggle. It's a war that we have no choice but to win. And you have everybody, and you have our elites in Israel saying, oh, no. Let's list this war and get the Americans to coerce us into maintaining the PLO. And, we want to save the PLO. And if that means saving Hamas, so be it, right? And then they're getting crushed by the Israeli people. We're saying, hell no, we're done with that. And, this is a dead narrative. It's never been correct. I've been fighting against this I was in it. I was in the peace talks with the PLO during my military service. I never was a big believer in it to begin with, but, my experience there just proved that I was right as far as I was concerned. Maybe one day I'll talk to you about that a little bit. But, I've been fighting this for 30 years. And I keep thinking, we finally kicked it, but it worked out. No, because everybody is really advanced by maintaining it. And it just reached that final dead end. You kick the can down and you think, oh, well, it's good. I'm going to get a salary from whatever NGO again, and it'll be fantastic. And I'll get on all of the media because everybody wants to hear how it's Israel's fault. It's the fault of the Israeli left, of the Israeli right, whatever it is. It's done. The Israeli people are done with it. And I really believe for the first time that no amount of American pressure is going to change because the Israeli people are just done. We're not going to be willing to walk away from this fight with less than victory, regardless of the cost. And the cost is already so painful that it's hard to breathe in and out when we hear the death tolls every morning and through the day. But we get it. We got it on October 7th. We see that the Biden administration definitely didn't get it. Obviously, the UN will never get it. EU will never get it. But Israelis got it. And it would be great if American Jews would get it. And by the way, it would be great if Americans got it. Because, it must get tiring failing all the time. Middle East policies making no sense, having nothing to do with anything, and all of the American soldiers who were killed in wars that ended up leading to an Iranian victory in Iraq and Afghanistan and everywhere else. Reality is a much better basis for policy, even if it's more difficult to get your arms around. It's very hard to believe that the problem here is that you've latched onto this blame the Jews kind of foreign policy and said that it's wise. But that's really what's happened. And it's not our fault. And we're not going to accept the blame anymore. Anyway, those are my thoughts for today. And I'll talk to you again later next week. Take care.